I'm Eric Friesen. This is In Performance on CBC Radio 2. We're going to spend the next half hour getting acquainted with a man who occupies one of the most prestigious teaching positions in the world at Indiana University in the small Midwestern city of Bloomington. For over 30 years, the legendary violinist Joseph Gingold taught at Indiana. When Gingold died in 1995, university administrators came knocking at the door of a Canadian, Mauricio Fuks. Fuks was born in Montevideo, schooled in New York, and eventually made his home in Montreal. CBC Ottawa music producer Jill Laforte met Mauricio Fuks in his studio at Indiana University earlier this year and discovered a man who's had a lifelong passion for the violin.
I remember when I was about 6 years old in Uruguay, I was listening to Chrysler playing the Mendelssohn Concerto, and it brought tears to my eyes, and I just couldn't get away from the radio. It was one of these old, tall radios, and I got myself inside the box, and I was just there, fixed to this playing. And I was playing the piano at that point. After I heard that, I said to my father, I want to do that. I want to play that. I don't think I knew it was a violin, but it was something that moved me tremendously. My first teacher was a pupil of the great Leopold Auer, was, Heifetz's teacher, and he was responsible for instilling in me a love for the instrument.
What was his name?
His name was Ilya Fidlon. He was Russian. Besides giving me a love for the instrument, he was a wonderful musician. He made me listen to a lot of music, a lot of violinists. And he inspired me very much. He also happened to be a fantastic pedagogue. He taught me from an early age how to practice. He used to practice with me, I remember, from the age of 12 until I left for the United States at 16. He practiced with me at least 3 hours a day. And he would really teach me how to practice more with the head and less with the body.
How did he teach you how to practice?
Well, I would practice in front of him, and he would say, for example, well, you're wasting time, you're wasting energy, you should do this as opposed to that, you see? Because, in the long run, you play as well as you're practicing is good, you see? He was wonderful with that. He had tremendous patience. I loved him like a father, really. He taught me so much, really, about the violin and music and practicing, so that when I went to Juilliard at 16 and became the youngest student at the Juilliard School, I knew already how to practice, and I had a very good fundamental technique.
There were more wonderful teachers during the 7 years Mauricio Fuks spent at the Juilliard School of Music in New York. These included Joseph Fuks, Ivan Galamian, and members of the Juilliard Quartet. But it was in Los Angeles, a few years into his professional career, that Fuks met his most inspirational teacher, Jascha Heifetz.
Mr. Heifetz was, in my opinion, the greatest violinist of all time. Look, it was a unique, unparalleled way of playing. I mean, he could be so dramatic and so poetic. I wanted to be next to him as an inspiration to me. And that he was. You know, I played chamber music with him many times. I played duos with him. For him, I mean, we used to have about 6, 7 people in the class, and we spent 10 hours a week with him. He would teach by showing more than anything else. And just to hear him play up close like that was such a great inspiration. It was even more of an impression than his records, because the sound was even more beautiful up close. And so it was absolutely fantastic.
After his year with Heifetz, Mauricio Fuks moved to New York. There he pursued a freelance career as a soloist, chamber, and orchestral musician. Then in 1971, a visit to friends in Canada proved to be a turning point in his life.
I knew I had a very wonderful friend in Montreal and his wife, who had just had the terrible tragedy of losing their only son. And I said, you know, before I play the Mostly Mozart Festival, I said, I'm going to go and see them. So I went up to Montreal, and it was summer. And of course, it was so nice to be with him. He was a member of the Montreal Symphony, violinist like me, studied with the same teacher in Uruguay.
What was his name?
Adolfo Bornstein. He passed away 2 years ago. He had, if you remember, Quart Tango group. He played tangos wonderfully. And he arranged for a quartet evening in his house. Let's play quartets. And a marvelous man came to play cello. You must know him. To me, he's the Mr. Cello of Canada. His name is Walter Joachim. And we played an evening of quartets. Meanwhile, I was falling in love with the city. You know, it wasn't winter. And Montreal is so beautiful. I started to think, you know, yes, I'm doing wonderfully in New York, but I'm tired of living in New York, you know, and freelancing in New York. Maybe I could come here. I mean, a smaller city, yet a big city, and also more European, and I'm Latin myself, and it felt right. It just felt right. And I told Walter this, and he says, come over, I'll get you work right away. I said, Walter, I said, how do you know you're going to get me? If I say I get you work right away, I get you work right away. Anyhow, I came as a tourist, and 3 days after, I got an offer from the CBC radio to be principal second violinist in the CBC Symphony. And with that contract, I went to the border, and I got my visa. That was the beginning of my 23 years in Montreal. And of course, eventually I became a Canadian citizen. And I must tell you that I still feel very Canadian. You know, I love that country. I really love the country.
In Montreal, Mauricio Fuks joined the Montreal Symphony Orchestra as associate concertmaster. He also received concertmaster offers from orchestras in Europe. But for some time, Fuks had been suffering from chronic back pain. After only 2 years in Montreal, he found it more and more difficult to play the long hours required of a professional violinist. A back operation didn't solve the problem. Gradually, Fuks' dream of a performing career slipped away. Instead, he found himself turning towards teaching.
From a physical point of view, I became very interested in the way the body works when you play the violin. How can people avoid having problems when they get older? And so, in a way, I believe it made me a better teacher. It really did, absolutely.
And what was it that drew you to teaching? I mean, circumstances partly drew you to teaching, but what was it that...
Well, what drew me to teaching was that some people started to approach me, even while I was in the Montreal Symphony, and said, we would like to study with you. And I would say, well, but I never taught. They said, never mind, we heard you play and we want to study with you. And I said, well, okay. And as I began to teach a few people, I realized that I was very interested in it, that I would go home and I couldn't stop thinking about the lesson and what I could do to help this person. So, and that I enjoyed thinking about that. So that was what drew me. And then when I started at McGill, I remember the first year I had about 6, 7 pupils, imagine. Most of them terrible. And I will never thank these people enough because they were such good guinea pigs. I could really learn on these people because I couldn't harm them. And no matter what I did, you see, if I could get these people to play better, then it means I was learning something about teaching, you see. So if I would have had very, very talented students, I don't think I would have become as good a teacher. Because talented students sometimes have a way of playing through all kinds of bad habits. So having those poor students helped me tremendously to learn how to teach.
What was the biggest challenge